Yeah, make sure. No, it's no, the beer's coming. Is it? Yeah, it is. Is that your beer? Yeah. Okay, we're gonna get started here. This is our last panel of the day here in our economic triad of economic, social, and environmental issues in outdoor recreation. And the purpose or focus of this particular panel is to help our audience kind of understand some strategies for paying for and supporting outdoor recreation. And Dave, you kind of started us out this morning, kind of laying a really nice kind of overall picture of this. I think you did a really nice job of talking about, where some of this money is coming from, in terms of what hunters and fishers hunters and people who fish kind of went and actually asked for that for them to be taxed so that they could help support wildlife and conservation efforts. You also talked about, how, the stamps and the things that people are using for OHV stickers and so forth are helping to support motorized recreation. And you also talked about some of the issues too around the fact that, non-motorized, the folks, when we're out riding our mountain bikes, for example, we're not really contributing to people who are hiking or, walking our dogs. We're not really leaving. So this is the panel that we assembled here with the three of you. Was really to kind of focus on understanding strategies for supporting for and paying for outdoor recreation. So, and also we have another thing that kind of frames our discussion is this great new outdoor recreation trust fund, which I think is really innovative and is going to be incredibly helpful going forward. So the frame that we kind of put this into is if we are to grow outdoor recreation in Wyoming, we need to pay for it, not only to build the infrastructure, but to maintain it throughout its useful life. Grants are helpful for initial construction, and some grants can also be helpful for ongoing maintenance, though grants can be problematic with matching requirements, and many small entities can't kind of meet those matching requirements. There's also only so much money available to outdoor recreation, and other state priorities and needs like roads, education, police, basic government functions often take precedent. And with the tax structure in Wyoming that makes us reliant on booms and busts, as the students just talked about previously in the energy industry, it's difficult to fund and maintain outdoor recreation. So it's with that in mind, how do we pay for it? So I'm really excited to be joined here with some folks, Dave Glenn, Mike Kusiek, and Taylor Phillips, all who kind of bring kind of unique perspectives on innovative funding strategies. But Dave, the way we're gonna kind of run this is maybe less for everybody, but I want to point to some specific questions that I want to ask you guys. So Dave, I want to start by asking you about the new trust fund for outdoor recreation. How did that come to be, and how will that work? What is it gonna fund, and what is it gonna do?
Great question. Thanks, Dan. And that start, you just depressed the hell out of me regarding what's going on with outdoor recreation in the state.
To raise us up from there. So start at the bottom, right?
Yeah, maybe I can start back about 7 years ago. The Outdoor Recreation Office was created, and the state legislature said, we're going to give you 2 years worth of money to get that going, and then you've got to find other funding. And as my boss used to say it, we bake sell the hell out of everything to try and figure out how to pay for this office. And we tried a user fee about 2016, roughly 2016, similar to the ORV and motorized plan, and it got blown up. The non-motorized folks weren't excited about it. Taxation without representation. We fought wars over this, and we backed off. And so then we decided, well, let's create an outdoor recreation trust fund without any money in. And it was an interim topic in the Tribal Recreation, Wildlife, Cultural Resources Committee, and passed out of committee. But it was right after an election. So a lot of those committee members left, and new committee members came in and it was voted down. No money devoted to it, but just creating a trust that would allow us to go out and shake the money tree and see if we could find some money to put in there. We brought it back up again 2 years ago. Representative Newsom, again, who's in the room, has led the charge on that and really pushed folks. And she was looking at it from an economic point of view, but there was a lot of discussions at Tribal Recreation Wildlife Committee of let's keep our youngsters here. Let's have that community viability and that growth. So it was created this year. But when we had it kind of set up on how it was going to be created and how the money was going to be spent and how it was going to work, and essentially that was gutted out of the bill. And what the money is still going into the account. So we're actually meeting tomorrow to start having discussions to figure out exactly how that money is going to be spent and how it's going to be divvied out. So I don't know that answer.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I hope you figure that out. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
I'll be out of a job if we don't.
Okay. Yeah. No pressure. No pressure. So great. Thanks, Dave. Mike, how, you're with Wyoming Pathways, and it might behoove the audience. I know you're on several other panels, but it might behoove them just to kind of understand what Wyoming Pathways does, and maybe how, maybe kind of help explain how you guys have been so successful in completing so many outdoor recreation projects across the state.
Thanks, Dan, and appreciate the comments about Wyoming Pathways. Started 10 years ago, or 11 now, in Jackson, Wyoming. And if you've been to Jackson, you might recognize the pathway that leaves from town and heads out towards the airport that's away from the highway. And that was something that folks wanted for a long time. And people discovered, by golly, this is pretty nice. We can walk and ride our bikes and do things without cars. As Jackson becomes more crowded, having a car there may not always be the best idea anyway, but they've grown to have around 130 miles of pathways in that vicinity. I believe it's somewhere in that number. Don't quote me on that part, but a lot of them. And since then, Wyoming Pathways has started working with local communities on building recreational trail called single track or multi-user trail on public lands in the Forest Service and the BLM around the state. And we're also helping some other communities try to achieve what folks have in Jackson. We have a survey on our website for the last 3 years that's been asking folks, here's what we offer. Do you want some of these amenities? So far, 40 municipalities have reached out and said, yes, we absolutely do. I was just talking with some folks from Saratoga a couple of years ago. A person from Saratoga wrote and said, you know, I don't know how this works. I'm a mom. I want my kids to get to school safely if they walk or ride their bikes. So it's everything from that level all the way up to something we built last year outside of Lander, downhill optimized mountain bike trail with features. And I use that example because it was built with intention by the land manager to eliminate some of the trail conflict we were having. That's a very popular spot around Lander. A lot of hikers, horses, mountain bikers, trail runners. You pull the folks who are going the fastest off on a trail that's one directional, and you limit it to just those users, and we'll hopefully see it less conflict. So we're always looking for solutions like that. In terms of our funding model, we have a many-stepped approach where we first need someone to say, hey, I want something to happen in my community, in my public landscape. Then we make sure we have public land manager permission. So one of the funding recipes literally is cultivate those relationships through the land managers. I think we heard a lot today from our friend Brendan in the Forest Service about they're trying their best, they're staffing up, there's turnover, there's housing issues there. We're all kind of fighting the same fight. And that relationship means I'm going to get that land manager some wins. I'm going to help them look good in their community and with their boss. And then we go about the business of finding funding. And as Dan mentioned, and a lot of folks in the room know, we have a couple of primary sources. We have the Recreational Trails Program, which Dave astutely noted is primarily funded by folks that aren't silent sports individuals. Those who run, bike, or climb don't pay into that bucket. We also have the Transportation Alternatives Program, which funds our programs in communities. Both of those are what we call underfunded and oversubscribed. I think the challenge is, I'll just lay this scenario out. When we build a new mile or two of trail, which is a typical project in a given year, everybody's stoked and they want to go out and ride it or run it. But now that's a whole bunch more users than were there last year, and it's only a mile more. And so you may, in fact, wind up with more trail conflicts. So the thing we've been looking for a number of years is to build what we call a demonstration project of a trail system. Trail system that gets people dispersed. All the users are out there. Everyone gets to enjoy it like it's private and quiet, like our friend was talking about. Or Dave, you were actually talking about Fruita that way. They wanted to build it that way. And so That kind of money is what we look for when we come for a piece of legislation. We'll say, let's put $40 million more in the RTP program. But that's a one-off ask. And in the outdoor rec world, there's 100 of us asking for money. We want more shooting ranges. We want better access for fishing. We want snowmobile rights, whatever people want, it all costs money. So the money has to come from somewhere. It is a big challenge. Some of the things I'll talk about perhaps in a bit are ideas that we have seen that might be a slower train to get there, but they're proven recipes. And I think, Dave, what you were talking about earlier, at some point, as a mountain biker since the 80s, and it's my favorite outdoor recreational activity among many, I don't think any of us really, if it was designed well, would mind parting with 20 or 30 bucks a year to make sure we got more trails that were better maintained. That's one benefit, but I see a much bigger benefit, and that is we now have skin in the game. And we can say we're contributing, and we can count those dollars, and we can count those users. One of the first questions asked at TRW this session by Representative Burkhart from Rollins, and he's well aware of all of our projects and really wants to work with us. He's literally asked, how much do mountain bikers pay? Well, that's zero. And so I think there's a solution somewhere.
Bad answer.
Yeah, that's a tough answer when you're going to the Wyoming legislature and you want to say, hey, give us some of your money. I get that it's a fraught problem, but I also think there's a solution in there somewhere among other ideas.
Can I interrupt for just a second?
Please,
You said
go ahead.
Jackson, Wyoming?
You've been there?
Jackson's in Wyoming?
Well, I mean,
Believe it or not, yes.
Yeah. So, and one little fact, so the former executive director of Wyoming Pathways, who was really a big advocate for getting the pathways going up in Jackson, loved to kind of rub in the face of county commissioners that the SPET, the specific purpose tax, passed by way higher percentage than any of you were elected by. Maybe not the best way to get things done, but it was it was an impactful thing. Like 80 some odd % of people in Teton County voted for the specific purpose tax to fund pathways, and it was overwhelmingly received up in the county to build those. So I think it's interesting. But yes, Teton County, Colorado is. Sorry, I meant Wyoming. Yeah. So speaking of which, Taylor, sorry, we're taking a lot of digs at you, and we haven't even had a chance to.
I know. Give me a chance here.
Yeah. So Taylor, so one of the questions we have for you is that wildlife in Wyoming face many perilous issues. I mean, especially that we're seeing right now with such a harsh winter. But in the past, obviously, they've also had drought, development, habitat fragmentation, disease, impacts to movement across the land to access food and forage. So you work in the wildlife. I mean, you work in a kind of a non-consumptive side. Maybe have you talk a little bit about that of wildlife. But if you could tell us a little bit about what the Wildlife Fund does, and specifically about this innovative kind of model that you guys have put together for Wildlife for Tomorrow.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, Dan, for the opportunity. So as these gentlemen are saying, yes, I'm from Teton County, from Jackson, and I operate a small business, EcoTour Adventures, Wildlife Park Interpretive Programming through the GYE, and it's been a blessing. We get to interact with visitors from all over the world and connect them to Wyoming national parks and the natural world. And it's important work. And it's tourism. It's a form of recreation. And recreation certainly has a place if it's done, responsibly. 20 years almost now in this industry, I've also dabbled in the NGO, the conservation space, and it's brought me to a place where I've seen this disconnect of wildlife, that it drives the tourism economy, the $4.6 billion tourism economy across the state. And Dave, thanks for those numbers earlier, and those numbers are important to bring to Cheyenne, and it tells the story. And I look at who's paying for this wildlife. Well, it's hunters and anglers. And hunters and anglers over the past 7,500 years have done incredible things to bring wildlife populations up from the brink of extinction. So, the disconnect is, okay, who's benefiting? Well, we are all benefiting. Being a Wyoming resident, gosh, I love driving the state and seeing the pronghorn and the deer. And I love going out with the rifle and my, fly rod, to harvest these species. So, this has led me to, connect with the Game and Fish Department. And, I share these concerns with the Game and Fish Department's president, Chris McBarnes. The Game and Fish Department's nonprofit partner, the WYldlife Fund, and their president, Chris McBarnes. And, Chris McBarnes, he and I had this great discussion and conversation by Flat Creek as it runs through Jackson on one of the beautiful pathways. Thank you, Mike. And so in the department, they picked it up and they're like, hey, this is a great concept. The state of Wyoming's been trying to crack this nut for a long time of, how to engage, the travel, the tourism, the recreation industries to, kind of pay for this, this resource of wildlife. So that led me to, join the board of the WYldlife Fund. And again, so the WYldlife Fund, we're the Game and Fish Department's partner nonprofit. And, we are here across Wyoming to unite all people to get behind wildlife conservation, wildlife crossings, education, inspire the next generation of, nature and wildlife enthusiasts. And it's been a great partnership for sure.
Right. Yeah, and particularly what you're doing there is, so talk a little bit about like how you're kind of recruiting businesses and the kind of partnerships with businesses that you're as the Wildlife Tourism for Tomorrow. And do you want to talk a little bit about that and maybe about the beer, which is kind of going to be flowing here at 5 o'clock?
And so this beer here, Wild Amber Ale. Thank you, to Altitude Brewing here in Lander. They brewed this craft beer for us, and thank you so much for Jake and the Hobbs School for helping this collaboration. But what we were doing is, here you go ahead and crack that, Dave. You ready to go? Proceeds from that can will go to the WYldlife Fund, which is fantastic. But what we're doing is, so businesses across the state benefit from the travel and rec industries, right? And we are tapping businesses in those industries to financially give back to wildlife conservation. And we're getting great responses. Currently we have 75 businesses on board. We've already raised close to $250,000, and those dollars are going on the ground to support projects, habitat projects, wildlife research, crossing work, fence removal, et cetera. So it's we've proven the model that, hey, on the grassroots level, we can engage businesses to give back, and businesses, they get it, right? Businesses know that, hey, wildlife is driving our tourism economy. Businesses get it that all recreational activities have some level of impacts. So, we just tipped the iceberg, in a 1.5 years time. I think it's pretty incredible. And to think what we can do in 5-10 years time, it's like we are significantly just adding to the North American model of wildlife conservation that's been in place for almost 100 years. And it's, the same models in place in most states around the country. So it's really cool to, kind of be a part of the WYldlife Fund as we're leading this charge. And, and I can't thank, enough, the Hobbs School. Thank you for your guys' support. Thank you to our governor and Director Nesvik and Director Schober for seeing the value in supporting these industries that have incredible potential to give back.
Yeah, I think it's really just great that you have those business partnerships, because I know businesses like Altitude then kind of receive, they get, it's part of their brand, it's part of what they do and what they support when they kind of tie those collaborations between businesses to kind of have these kind of uniquely branded elements. While it might not be a huge moneymaker for them, it is a major kind of thing to kind of add to show that they're supporting and they value this and it's important to it. So I would assume that there's a lot of other opportunities to kind of other partnerships or brand partnerships that could kind of continue to elevate this, that private businesses could rely on? Is that a fair thing?
For sure. You know,
Okay.
we want to bring value to the businesses, right?
Yeah.
You know, we have 75 businesses now, and, you know, a lot of those businesses have joined this effort due to their philanthropic, you know, philosophies, which is incredible. We want to go a step farther and build financial incentive. And, you know, and this is a great partnership with the Wildlife Fund, Wildlife for Tomorrow, the Hobbs School, and Altitude. You know, we are bringing Altitude, you know, PR, we're bringing them press, we are bringing them more customers.
Yeah.
You know, as we kind of move this model across the state. You know, business owners that connect with Wildlife for Tomorrow are displaying decals on their storefront windows, and the advertising dollars that we're working with now are telling potential consumers, patrons, to support businesses that are showing this decal.
Great. That's awesome. You're making me thirsty, by the way.
All right, I know. This beer will be poured out, so do your part for conservation and have a drink or two.
We will have to do that. And I just want to remind everybody too, on your tables, if you do want to ask, I see that there's some questions coming through. You're welcome to ask questions. You're also welcome to upvote other people's questions if you'd like to do that. So the next question I have for the panel, and this is the one I want to kind of focus on for Dave first. You know, the big question here is the initial issue that we kind of frame this in is that, you know, how do we support outdoor recreation development in the future going forward? So how do we pay for it? And one of the things I know down in Colorado, for example, the Meridian Institute, Dave, I don't know if you're familiar with this study. Colorado's division of or Colorado State Parks looked at different funding models to fund state parks, and they looked at potentially putting on some type of tax for outdoor, you know, equipment or clothing. And they did a whole bunch of these panels where they went around and talked to like business owners and recreationalists, and they found that the most likely thing that people would be willing to pay for is an opt-out state parks pass as part of their vehicle registration. So now I'm pretty sure it's in place right now. We tried to invite them to come up here and talk about this, but it was kind of an innovative funding model. So every time you get your vehicle registration in the mail down in Colorado, you automatically get a state parks pass as included with that, but you can just check a box and say, no, I don't want a state parks pass. But if you do, you know, return your registration and write the full check, either you intended to do that or not, you automatically get that state parks pass. And what they found with that study was that even though it would likely drive up visitation to state parks, it likely wouldn't result in such an overwhelming amount of additional visitation that they wouldn't be able to handle it. It's relatively new, and that's just one example of kind of an innovative funding model. But what are some other? I mean, is that something that we could bring to Wyoming? Or I mean, obviously with a lot of kind of thought and kind of thinking ahead on there. But what are some other things that we can do to kind of help fund or pay for this? Is it mountain biker? Do mountain bikers need to get together and like say, hey, we need to put some skin in the game. We need to write some legislation. What are your kind of thoughts? How do we pay for this stuff going forward?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. Going back to the vehicle registration, we actually looked at that several years ago. The problem in Wyoming is we have 500,000 people. And it would not actually produce that much money to fund state parks. It would be less than our current budget right now. And so to add an additional tax for something like that, it just wasn't going to fly. We looked at, again, Representative Newsom brought up scratch-off tickets, where percentage of money would go to outdoor recreation. We looked at that and said, that's actually not a lot of money either, as far as the estimated profits. I think what Mike said earlier is even if it's not a lot of money, they do need to get skin in the game. And I don't want to pick on mountain bikers because I think it's everybody.
We should pick on mountain bikers.
Yeah, we might as well. We might as well. I'm a mountain biker. I was just aghast when, you know, I have a $5,000, you wouldn't notice it, but I have a $5,000 mountain bike. You don't think I'm going to pay $20 to be able to ride it on good trails and to have better trails? Everybody's going to do that. You got to get over the hump to do it. And just to show that you have skin in the game. And I would take it a step further. The way our motorized trails program works is it's mostly on federal lands. And those federal land managers have the ability to enroll those trails into the program. And what that means is we can build them on there. We do an MOU with them and we can build those trails. What it also means is they can then apply for grant dollars for law enforcement, for vehicles to work for that law enforcement and to maintain those trails. And we usually tend to maintain them. So big picture, I would love to see that on a lot of these federal trails. I'm a horse packer, and half of the trails in Wyoming you cannot ride on right now because they're so beat up. Forest Service is trying, but with the windfall, the beetle kill, all the other stuff that's happening, they can't keep up. And so if we had a funding source to help them with that, it's going to bring more people in to experience and use that piece to see the wildlife, to protect it, for me to kill it, for others to do things. So I would love to see a broader conversation. As a horse packer, same thing. Again, we brought that bill forward. We had something that said, hey, if you volunteer 10 hours of your time in trail maintenance, trail work, you get a free pass for a year. So it kind of pushed for volunteerism as well. We've had some initial discussion with the federal agencies, and they've been open to it. I wouldn't say they've gone rah-rah, but they've been open to having those conversations. But it opens a can of worms, right? Does a climber that's parking up above the Little Paposia going over to Wolf Point, do they have to pay the fee because there's a trail there, even though it's a pirate trail, whatever it's called? But I think I would love to have that conversation in a broader picture and to see how much money would come in, because I think it would be millions of dollars. And I've got one other idea that's crazy.
Go for it.
But my wife and I went on a late honeymoon about 4 years ago in Cancun. Hey, we just got married 5 years ago. And so we get to Cancun, and then you pay a $25 tourist fee when you get there. How do we do that in Wyoming? That'd be pretty cool for these people coming across the state. I don't think the Office of Tourism, I don't know if they're in here, they wouldn't like that idea. But
Diane's not here. It's okay.
it's all right. You didn't hear it from me.
Yeah.
Mike said it. But I think that's something to talk about. That goes in. The reason they say they do it in Cancun is because we're using the resource. We're damaging the resource. We pay $25. We have fun for 5 or 6 days. Who's going to complain about $25? Just a thought.
Yeah.
Can I add in here?
Yeah,
quick?
yeah, please.
You know, and to piggyback on something on that you said earlier, Dave, you know, about hunters and anglers, like stepping up to the plate, 30, 40 years ago, about, you know, saying that, hey, tax us. They are organized. Hunters and anglers are organized, like the recreational sector across the state. Like, we are so fragmented. Like, we don't have that like central authority, you know, like the legislator, they're not gonna impose a tax on recreational use. But if we had more of a united voice as the recreational industry and you know, and came to Cheyenne and said, hey, tax us, here's some ideas, then something like that would fly. And that would help us, you know, grow this economy.
Dead on.
Yeah.
Dead on.
Mike, do you?
I got a slightly different direction if I could pivot. I love what you're talking about. And I do think, you know, just to spend a minute where you both were, there are so many ways we recreate here, and without a unified voice, people only relate to the ones they understand. If you haven't been on a horse in your life and you're sharing a trail with a mountain biker coming downhill, that can be a terrifying experience for everybody. And similarly, the person, maybe some people haven't been on a mountain bike or haven't climbed or whatever, but so we all come from our own perspective. And this recipe I've discovered from other areas of my life, working in healthcare and education, and also I'm going to pick on Steph Kessler for a quick second. I started working in conservation, and thanks to Steph, and one of the phrases she used right away is you've got to discover how to work with unnatural allies. And I think what that really means to me is the people who don't get where you're coming from, they aren't thinking like you're thinking, but you might have a lot in common. And that's why they're allies. And so to work with unnatural allies, I think you have to show folks, not tell them. And you have to help them get some wins. You have to help them see that what I'm asking for makes us all better. Be creative with finding money. I want to tell a quick story. There's I forget which economist said it years ago. It's one of my favorite lines. In God we trust, all others bring data. And so Lander was able to put together a couple of economic impact reports on what happened when Lander went from a mining town to a climbing town. And in the 80s, those of you, Steph, could probably tell these stories when Knowles was brand new and the mine was shut down. You probably heard the word hippie and granola and goddamn it, get out of town quite a bit for a while, but it quickly pivoted to be an outdoor rec town. And what we discovered with the outdoor rec in Lander, 12 people moved to that town for climbing. Mike Lilligren's one of them. I don't know if you guys know Jenna Ackerman. She's a good friend of mine. She lived in City Park for 6 months where you can camp for free. She then started the Middle Fork restaurant. She recently sold that restaurant at 36. Now she's in real estate. So 12 people did something like that. And if you haven't been to the Middle Fork, you need to go because it's world class. But it was started by someone who was a climber. And to the student's point about amenities traps, that's what happened. A lot of folks like Amy Skinner decided to sell gear out of the back of their car because they wanted to stay there and climb, she and Todd Skinner. And so, oh my gosh, we could use a breakfast place. We could use a climbing gym called Elemental. We could use a place called Molino that's an Italian food restaurant now, or we could use Maven. We could use 2 bike shops. People move there for climbing. Dr. Kopal, who's an applied economist at UW, I reached out to him through his role as an extension person. And I said, gosh, this is interesting data. 12 people started businesses here. How do we quantify the impacts? This is how we get data, and it's not that hard. He said, send me the gross revenue for those businesses and the total FTEs, full-time equivalents. So for 2019, those businesses shared very generously their gross revenue and their FTEs. It was private data. In 2019, for the little town of Lander, less than 8,000 people, $117.5 million went to the bottom line from those businesses. And the indirect effect of the FTEs was 119 people had full-time jobs in Lander. And if you think of a town of 7,000, a lot of those 7,000 are kids, probably not working too much. There's 119 is a big number. And that continues. We're seeing more and more businesses started that way. So I think if you're creative and you recruit on natural allies, you get a demonstration project next. And you say, look, here's what some money can do to our economy. Thermopolis is the next town that we've worked with that I see that happening. Thermopolis reached out and said, gosh, we've got world-class fishing. We got a hot springs. We used to be stronger than we are. We got a bunch of empty buildings downtown. Can we get some trails? This was Dusty Lewis and Wade Lippincott, member of city council and a business owner. Recognized that trails were a big deal and they're low cost and they yield high return every year. And so gentleman that's with us at this conference today, Todd Thibodeau, has since built 13 miles of trail out and back from the hot springs. You can park in Thermopolis. Now what these projects are called are Main Street to the Mountains. What's cool about that is you don't get back in your car when you're done. You go have a beer and a sandwich in the place that you're eating or riding. And you can now ride from the springs and get on top of T Hill, go across the old airport, go across the golf course and get on top of Round Top. And you can see 3 mountain ranges up there. And many folks in Thermop lived there their whole life and never got on top of Round Top. And that project totally cost about $65,000, $70,000 to build. A lot of that was grant money, some was donations. And they're going to recoup that year over year. It's a demonstration project. And now Thermopolis and Hot Springs County are reaching out and saying, we want more of this. We want to become an outdoor recreation destination more than we already are and grow our town that way. So I think there's money there. I think if you show people, if you recruit people, you come with data, I think you can get people to say, yeah, that does look like a good use of our funds. Because until we get, and thank you again, Representative Newsom, all of you who voted for the trust fund, that may take a while to mature. And one thing I recognize in this space right now, the money faucet's kind of on for outdoor rec. There's money available for projects. We need things like NEPA. We need things like communities on board, but we need to think long-term. And I think that's one solution.
Yeah, that's great, Mike. And one of the other thing that I think that's really important to point out about that same amenity that was built in Hot Springs that you guys were so instrumental in getting done is that actually becomes an asset for the community members as well. And that's kind of the beauty of outdoor recreation amenities is that it not only becomes, Diane Schober can claim it as a tourism asset, but it also becomes an amenity that locals can use and enjoy and derive value from. So it's kind of dual purpose in that it attracts people and retains people and helps build that community as well. So
quality of life improvements for
quality
sure.
of life. Yeah. I want to turn to some questions here. And one of them here is, do other states have non-motorized user fees? And Dave, I think, isn't Indiana one of the only states that has a mountain bike fee, but for state parks or something?
I think it's Indiana and I think Wisconsin as well.
Right.
Don't hold me to those, but they do. And a lot of them are like Wyoming in the sense that for us, you come to our state park, you pay your $7 entrance fee, you can ride the trails. We've even talked about increasing that for those that bike or hike the trails because it is a higher impact. But they also just go out and create trails on federal lands. And they have horse optimized trails, they have bike optimized trails. And I looked that up a while back. I think it was like $20 a year to do it, or $5 each time you went. So they are starting to do that and starting to look at that.
Okay, great. And then there were a couple of questions in here. One of them was, I like the way this is framed from our friend Anonymous here. Why are we blaming people like mountain bikers for not contributing enough without providing them a framework through which to pay? And I think that's kind of an interesting one because I think it's actually, I mean, when we think back to what, I mean, it's a fair question, but it's also kind of gets back to that whole thing is that, if mountain bikers, because I'm one of them, I can give myself a hard time a little bit, but if mountain bikers were to get organized and say, look, we want mountain bike optimized trails, or we want more of this, we could get together and lobby and ask to kind of do something that would help support the development and maintenance of those trails, right? I mean, we don't necessarily need that framework. The framework's there. We just need to organize and figure out a way to tax ourselves so that we could help support the development of those types of trails. Is that?
I think so. And I apologize that mountain bikes are ezy to pick on.
Yeah,
we're talking a broad array of things. So again, I've got one. You wouldn't notice, but I've got one. But when we started running this, we started actually having public meetings and having public conversations about it. The local mountain bike club said no. They said, we're not excited. We're open, but we want mountain bike optimized trails, which is fine. We'd love to look at that. We don't want to pay for trails for hikers. Fair. We don't want to pay for trails for climbers. Fair. I think those are all great questions. I think it is that organizing piece to be able to come forward and organize and make it happen. We tried to do our due diligence. We got blown out of the water, frankly. This was many years ago and things have changed since then though.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Yeah. Optimize. What is an optimized bike trail? That's a trail that normally would that might have berms, jumps, drops, things that would be really fun and enjoyable for a mountain biker to participate on, but might not be as fun for a horse person or a hike. Actually, hikers and runners can typically, when it's optimized for bikes, unless a bike is screaming down the mountain, that's usually not a fun time for that usually creates a lot of user conflict. So yeah, anything that's kind of optimized for mountain biking, enhanced mountain bike trails. Is that fair?
Yeah, and we do have fly fisherman optimized trails too, Mike. So
yeah, all the willows are removed from the side so you don't get your hook caught, your fly caught. Yeah, exactly. 12 to 20 feet back, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
The other question here, and I don't know if we're really who's best prepared to answer this, but 86% of the Game and Fish license sale revenue comes from non-resident hunters. How do we explain to residents that non-resident hunters aren't the enemy? Maybe Taylor, you would take that one.
Oh boy.
You're going to have to channel Brian Nesbitt a little bit.
Channel Brian.
Yeah.
So can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, 86% of the Game and Fish license sales revenue comes from non-resident hunters. How do we explain to residents that non-resident hunters aren't the enemy?
Right, it's storytelling. Do our resident hunters that aren't so keen on sharing their hunting spot with the non-resident, are they aware that it's the non-resident that's footing most of the bills? So I think that's it, storytelling. So maybe we need to lean on Director Nesbitt on, educating the public that, hey, we have wildlife populations that we do large in part due to the non-resident hunters.
Yeah.
If I could add something, I think you're dead on, Taylor, but I would also add, if you're non-resident, you can't hunt in wilderness without a guide. That is huge for me as a resident. It's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
The other thing I would throw out from a state parks perspective, we hear this all the time. Why are there so many Coloradoans in our parks? And why are we I can tell you from experience over a dozen years, Well, frankly, the Coloradoans are better mannered and nicer in our state parks.
Whoa.
than Wyoming. I'm serious. I'm serious. I'm serious. They're grateful and appreciative. And I just wanted to make sure, they bring their money and then they go home.
Yeah. So another question here is that sportsmen, and yeah, I've been to Sandy Beach on Memorial Day weekend, and yeah, that's insane. I'll never do that again in my life.
Me neither.
Yeah. That's in Glendale State Park. It was a former like heavily known party zone, and you can just camp wherever. For a while, it was camp wherever you want. It's been really clamped down on, but anyway, okay, moving on to our next question here. We're getting pretty close to the end, but sportsmen and motorized folks are required to pay for their recreational use. Why not tax the non-motorized recreational user when they buy their bikes or equipment? And I think I could probably answer that just a little bit in that study that was done by the Meridian Institute. And we did try to invite one of them up here. So I'm going to channel Robin Palikas, who was a former UW grad, and she's with the Meridian. She actually was involved in that study. They actually did a whole bunch of these panels. They went around and talked to manufacturers, retail sales folks like Wes. They did all these panels. And they found a lot of resistance to that type of tax of buying bikes and equipment. So that's typically like, I think it's called an excise tax, where you kind of tack it on to certain types of equipment. And there was a lot of resistance. But the one thing that they found consensus around was an opt-out, like for example, that opt-out state park pass that is automatically put onto your vehicle registration. And then you can just check a box and say, no, I don't want to do that. And then you don't have to get it. So I think that's the primary reason, unless you guys have any other.
I would throw out, we actually looked at that last year in Tribal Recreation, Wildlife, Cultural Resources Committee. The way our tax system is set up, it's very difficult to pick and choose certain items to be able to say, we'll only tax backpacks and tennis shoes versus this and this. And that, I know that was one of the roadblocks that we were looking at as well.
Okay, and at the federal level for like the hook and bullet tax or those things, those are tacked on at a different level. So that's kind of removes the state completely from it. So it makes it a lot easier. So if we wanted to look at federal legislation, which good luck, that'd be even harder to kind of get those kind of excise taxes put on at that level. But that could be another way. I mean, that could be advocated for at a higher level. So yeah. Okay, any other? Yeah, Taylor?
Well, yeah, just to add on to that a little bit, and some things I've thought about as it relates to Wildlife for Tomorrow, right? We're building this coalition of businesses in the tourism and rec space that are supportive of, philanthropic contributions to support the resource. And and I've been thinking like, okay, if we build this coalition of thousands of businesses across the state, that's going to send a message to our lawmakers that, hey, there is support for maybe a tax.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, the last question I want to move on to with the group, and sorry, I have to get my thing out here. So in this forum, as we think about balancing the benefits and impacts of outdoor recreation expansion in Wyoming, what are you most concerned about and what are you most excited about?
I'll jump in. I'm excited for all the energy around outdoor rec. I was talking with Dave earlier, perhaps even yesterday, about this. The legislation that came before folks in Cheyenne was almost all completely supported all the way through, and it was bipartisan and people had good things to say. And I think that awakening is happening, that it's a big part of our GDP. 3.8% is a pretty conservative estimate, and the amount of money it's bringing in, it's time to put something toward that. We also see a lot of folks, I think, come into the collaboratives, and that's exciting because those collaboratives are trying to do things the right way. And this build it the way we want it, whoever came up with that here for this conference is just the most brilliant person, because that's really what we're all trying to do. The local level, tell us what you want. What's challenging for me, it's always the same. We have a challenge with NEPA. For our projects to happen, there's a very thorough NEPA clearance, and we value that, but it's delayed often, and that sometimes doesn't line up with the funding opportunity. So sometimes projects can wait quite a while. And I think the other challenge that we face in my industry is there is a tremendous shortage of high-skilled quality trail building companies who also have high-skilled quality trail bosses to make sure the work's done right the first time. One of the ways we ensure these projects are successful for the long term is we tell land managers and communities there won't be a lot of money in maintenance. If you build it right the first time, these things are built to last. They should be there 30 or 40 years. We tell volunteer groups this is a way to leave your mark on the land in a legacy way. Like you can go back with your grandkids and ride this trail. So those challenges and opportunities are what I see. And yeah, thanks.
Yeah, opportunities, and I'm excited about the potential that the travel and rec industries have in terms of making their mark on conservation. And the more people we get outside, I think the better. Like we need it for our well-being, and bringing people outside, it creates stewards. That's what brought me to the conservation space, kind of spending time outside. So I think there's incredible opportunities to create our next generation of stewards for these industries to financially contribute to conservation, because conservation is everyone's business. We are a part of the natural world. Too often, I think, humans, we feel like we are separate from the natural world. But if we don't have clean water, clean air, the microbes in our bodies, like we don't have it. We don't have anything. So like we can use these and leverage these industries to support the natural world, what we so love and cherish in Wyoming.
And I want to also just kind of mention too, I think there's been two things that have happened. I mean, with the winter kill that happened this year, and when Director Nesbitt was up with the governor and Du Bois at that meeting, did you go to that? Were you there at that meeting?
No, I wasn't.
But and one of our faculty members from the Haub School was up there as well, Kevin Monteith, and they were kind of talking about some of the real concerns. What really struck me about that meeting was that there was just a lot of outpouring and concern for our wildlife around the state. And I know that they're moving also back to shed hunting on the west, a certain kind of part of the state as well, to kind of take some pressure off of wildlife. I guess I feel like there's a real groundswelling and concern for and care about our wildlife like abundant wildlife populations, and making sure that continues on to the future. I mean, a lot of our livelihoods depend on that. I mean, either from a consumptive or non-consumptive, and just for our livelihoods is incredibly important asset for our state. And I just think I just want to kind of throw that out there, that it just feels really good that there's a lot of people who are expressing concern about this and care a lot about our wildlife populations down. I think that's a really positive thing going forward. So
yeah, for sure. There's bison on our state flag, right?
Yeah.
And why the wildlife like runs through all of our blood. If we hunt or if we don't, it's like who we are as a state of Wyoming. Yeah. And it's incredible to hear, the hunting and the outfitting community, there are individuals that are saying, hey, let's cancel the hunting season this year, because of the concern of the casualties that we're seeing out, in southwestern Wyoming.
Yeah. Dave.
Yeah, it's tough for me, frankly. I think you talk about momentum, Mike, and I think that's really key. I get so excited. I was out riding horses up above our house this weekend on some state land, and there was 100 people out there. People were shed hunting, people were mountain biking already, people were hiking, jogging, running, walking their dogs. Some guy was shooting. It's just cool to be in Wyoming, to have that we have the ability to do that. This is riding from my house, that we have the ability to do that. And to keep that momentum up, I think is really key. I think one of the things that I'm starting to see is worry about outdoor recreation affecting wildlife habitat, bringing in invasive species as far as plants are concerned and other things. And we've got to get out in front of that, because if we don't, outdoor recreation is going to lose. And so that's something that I think is really key. And I think there's another piece with communities. We go through big planning processes with communities, and there's certain facets within that community that don't want a certain piece of outdoor recreation. And that's okay. But I think we've got to figure out how to get these communities more involved in the planning process, so they can contribute to saying about what they want, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And as maybe a preview for tomorrow, so I sit on the board of Pilot Hill, and that tomorrow don't think Sarah's in this room right now, but we're going to be talking a little bit. Sarah Brown Matthews is the executive director of Pilot Hill, and she'll be talking hopefully a little bit tomorrow about how we kind of engaged the community here with the planning and development of Pilot Hill, just as a great example for potentially other communities around the state to kind of work with state lands, work with local entities, to kind of bring everybody together. We have part of that is a wildlife habitat management area as managed as that. So minimize trails and minimize recreation, and then also allow for recreation to connect Laramie, 5,500 acres to connect Laramie all the way to 55,000 acres up on the national forest. It's just a great example of kind of collaboration, coming together, working together, minimizing impacts on wildlife, and opening up recreational opportunities where it's kind of a win-win-win all around. So yeah, that's a great. So hopefully you guys will all a little preview for tomorrow. So any closing thoughts here, gentlemen, on the just as we kind of round out, any final thoughts as we think about how we, pay for this, how we're going forward? I mean, we've heard a lot of really great ideas and things that you're already doing that are on the ground, but any other things that you guys have to add to it?
Yeah, I wanted to echo what Wes said in a previous session. He talked about what it takes to keep his business going and how he pivots when he needs to. And the quote that stuck with me is mean something to your community. And the way he does that is engages in very different ways that it wound up downstream having people like Dan brag about having a glow in the dark pint glass that he got years ago. He had to be here, but it was a good story. And I think if we look through that lens, how do I get what I want, or my group wants, or our town wants? You start by meaning something to your community would be a good recommendation.
Anything else?
I would throw out for me, I said it a minute ago, and I'm not going to beat that dead horse, but we are so lucky to have the ability to do what we do in Wyoming. We're not getting overrun. We're starting to, but we still have the ability to manage and do these things. And I think we're so fortunate that with the public lands we have and the things we have, I'm never leaving, man.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible spot we call home here. And to close, right? Our public lands, private lands, wildlife resources are not free. And it's something we need to think about.
Yeah. Great. Well, let's give a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you, gentlemen. We finished up 15 minutes early. So we're going to be setting up out in the hallway, or maybe the bar is actually already open. And I also want to invite you guys all to walk around and see some of our graduate student work. They've got poster presentations out there. So do kind of walk around and please engage with our students while you drink a beer and ask them questions about their research and what they've done. So thank you all.